Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Open Air presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm your host, Dexter Wimberly, and delighted to introduce you to today's guest. Trevor Anderson Evans is a painter and multidisciplinary artist working between Charlotte, North Carolina, and Colombia, South America. His practice spans acrylic, oil, collage, cut canvas, watercolor, and mixed media, incorporating found textiles, paper, and gesture-based mark making, including basketball dribble patterns to build layered surfaces that examine the lived realities of Black identity across regions and cultures. Trevor brings painting into conversation with sculptural form, video, and fashion, creating compositions that move between image and object, concealment and revelation. His influences include Sam Gilliam, Mark Bradford, Juan Logan, and Thornton Dial, as well as the imaginative, future-oriented lens of Afrofuturism. Architecture and design inform the structural logic of his work, which considers how narratives are assembled, eroded, and reconstructed over time. Recent projects expand into shaped canvases and installation-based forms that echo the irregular borders of states, nations, and cultural histories. Through his evolving practice, Trevor invites viewers to reflect on where history and perception meet at the surface of a painting and how the visible and invisible coexist within it. His work is also included in the exhibition Beyond Boundaries, Black Abstraction in the Elliot and Kimberly Perry Art Collection, currently on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center through August 30, 2026. Please join me in welcoming Trevor to today's conversation. How are you?
Doing good, Dexter. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. Well, that was a pretty in-depth bio, but what I always like to do is to give an artist an opportunity to introduce themselves. You can touch on some of the things that I guess was stated in your bio, but I'm very curious to hear a little bit more about you and the work that you make in your own words.
Sure, for sure. Um, let's start. Okay, so my name is Trevor Anderson Evans, and I would define myself as just an artist. I wouldn't consider myself just a painter. Painting is currently the medium that I'm working in to define the conversation that I really wanted to give the public. I'll say. Um, Currently what I'm working on is just stepping out of the canvas, stepping out of the idea of just being in a box and stepping more into the sense of like bringing all the worlds that I'm already immersed myself in and trying to find a way to put it into my practice. So being very, very inquisitive in my practice, I would say is the biggest part of my day to day working at just everything that I'm creating.
Thank you for that. So Colombia was mentioned in your
Yeah.
bio, and I'm kind of curious to hear more about that connection between North Carolina and Colombia. Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up in Colombia? Like what's the connection there?
Okay. So my fiance, she is Colombian and her family is all from there. And before I was going to go to my MFA program, I had no decision of where I was specifically going. And I wanted to put myself through a pre residency just to be able to get more culture and more understanding of what I was going to be talking about within my practice. And I felt like just seeing it from the lens that I saw it in, which would be just northern New Jersey and then the south of like South Carolina, North Carolina, like in both places, just seeing that conversation be able to be broadened. I think that was a big thing for me. So going to Columbia pre MFA program, and then I got the news that I was going to be attending the Royal College of Art, and so that's where I will be in September. I just wanted to be able to find a bigger, larger purpose in the work, and I didn't want to just study race in America. I felt like my work was going to be able to touch larger markets and larger places in the world. So I was like, well, I would have to be able to see uh, the things about race that were really, really like intriguing me. So I was like, well, investigating this would be a great decision.
Well, I assume that most people watching this have never been to Colombia, and so I'd love to hear a little bit about the experience of being there for the time that you've spent. Have there been any major revelations, things that you learned or were exposed to that completely shifted your perceptions?
I would say definitely the organization in America, how organization plays a major role in our day to day, how we are very stuck in our system. Where living in Colombia, you were able to see the opposite of that because you see a more of a raw view of how life is. Um, Not street sweepers every day, no trash on the street. Like it's complete opposite. So you're able to see more of the raw view of a world. Seeing more inspiration also too, where especially in the States there is very just a blanket view of opinions, and I would say that loosely, but more blanket view of opinions in the sense of there's places that you would go in and you will not be able to tell how or how just social stigmas played a major role in an area. I feel like that with Colombia it was different. I was able to see how just a simple church played a major role in a community, more than anything, and how Charlotte was very, very different from that experience. And so that was super important to see because as an artist, I feel like we're very influenced by the places that we are in. And if you stay in a place for a longer period of time, I feel like you're able to study and pick up certain things that you would have noticed just traveling for the 2 weeks that you usually would have. So I felt like that was a big thing in my practice too.
Were you able to also make work while you were there, or
Yes, yes. So I had a studio while I was there. I made work like a madman. It was a beautiful experience because I felt like that was where I was able to get even with a closer relationship with the work. You feel almost someone placed you there and they told you like, "Hey, study this for a year." So you could feel that better bond with the work.
yeah, talk to me a little bit about this upcoming MFA program. I think that's exciting, and I'd love to hear more about like that process, why you decided to go in that direction,
For sure.
and yeah, and what you're hoping to get out of it.
So I chose to go into my MMA program because I felt like it was going to be the next step to my work. I feel like that was going to be the conversation where I was going to have with my mentors, people that were faculty at the school, that I was going to be able to just cultivate the experience that I want to with one painting, but starting to broaden that and add the sculpture, add the video, add the photography in a tasteful manner. And so I wanted it to get a crash course of just learning all of these things. So going into it very, very educated, but still being able to just be a sponge and learn the most important things about the art, just bring you closer. And so I've been listening to a lot of my mentors. They would tell me just like look within, don't look so much outer. Just work on the things that you know you're good at, and then also to go to the places that you would be able to be taken care of, and just have your practice elevate and not hindered. So that was a big thing while I was looking at the MFA programs, seeing the people that come in and out of the programs, seeing how the artists when they leave, how the relationship is with the school and with also the art market itself. So that was a big thing. Just choosing the institutions. I had a list of Royal College of Art was on my list, Slade School of Art, Bard, and Yale. And so I was just looking at abstraction, how they treat the abstractionists, how they change the artists when they come in. I was just
Hmm.
studying a lot, seeing all of those things, those first pit crits, that last thesis, all of that was very, very important to just see like how do they foster the growth. Um, and so that was the biggest thing that going into the program. So that's why I chose to go.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned mentors a couple of times. Are these mentors other artists, or are they people just other fields? Can you talk? Because I think mentorship is such a important part of one's growth, and to be honest, in my life, I think I've had a lot of accidental mentors, but not like anything like official as I kind of like look back.
Right.
But you've mentioned it a couple times. So can you talk a little bit about who if you're comfortable, like who some of these
Sure.
mentors are, and how did that even come to be, and what impact has it had on you as an artist?
Definitely, definitely. Mentorship, I feel like, was the biggest thing that I wanted to take from the art space. I played basketball growing up as a kid and played college basketball, and I felt like learning from people was the biggest thing. As just choosing a profession or just choosing a career path, you would want to be able to be guided in the right way, and you would also want to hear the right things because you could always fall into a place where you would listen to the wrong people. They would give you advice, you would go about it in a different manner versus just having that really, really solid advice. And so my mentors play a role. Some are artists. I have two mentors that are artists, and then a few of them are like my collectors, and also just like people that have just nurtured me the whole time throughout my years of painting. That just give me the honest truth. I think it's super necessary as an artist, like to let you know that what you're making sucks, or what you're making is really, really groundbreaking for the growth that you're taking. So it's a beautiful thing to have. One of my mentors, his name is Juan Logan, and Juan is somebody that has taught me a lot of things, just not even getting a paintbrush and showing me anything, just more or less talking to me. And that's a big thing as a painter because you just want to not feel like you're crazy, and you want to feel like the things that you're putting out there actually have the meaning. It's just, how do I say this without, you know, uh, making it worse? Or how do I say this without just being a part of the conversation to talk about the times? How do I play a role in that without seeming like an unnecessary voice? So learning from your mentors is a beautiful thing because they're able to just angle that for you and you're able to have your own voice in it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Juan, because I was gonna come back to some of the artists that you've cited as being influential, like Gilliam and Bradford, Thornton Dial. But let's talk about those individuals as well. Like, what is it about their work that is influential to you? And do you come back to it often? Sort of, can you share a little bit about that?
For sure, for sure. I feel like every week the top five lists changes. Uh, that five, it just goes up and down because I study more and more, and I'm like, oh man, I love how Juan uses material, or I love how Juan's paint is layered, or Sam's paint is layered, and I end up building that relationship where I'm just like, well, David Hammonds is also a sleeper in this whole conversation. There's just a lot of motivation with their whole entire body of work, and you see how it motivated them to continue to work. I think that that's a big thing. So them being some of the artists that I wanted to follow, I studied the fact that they made a ton of work and that they didn't really fully judge themselves at the amount of work that they were making. So a lot of their work was respected 20 years later for certain bodies of work that they made in their career. Sam specifically, he has like the straight edge paintings that Rashid curated a few years back, and it was just eye-opening to see that this is where the growth actually takes you, because that is a painting series that is not very familiar to everybody about Sam Gilliam. But seeing those, you're just like, wow, this is where your career takes you. You have these facets that you build into, but you're able to just see the growth in your career. And so they're definitely a very, very big influence point because I see the work that they create, and I saw over the years how they always just ask the better question to just continue the practice and never kind of get. Sometimes you would see the stagnation in the artists, um, but not with them. Not with them. So it's beautiful to see.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. The idea of stagnation. I mean, I think a lot of artists that I've talked to over the years, not just in this format of open air, but just in general, There's definitely a danger of I love using this term because I think it's actually kind of funny. There's definitely a danger of making the same painting over and over and over again.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh, and I think for people outside of the art world, that might sound quite literal, right? Like, you actually like trying to make the same painting. No, I think what
Right.
ends up happening for a lot of artists is that something is successful and it works, right? And not just from a commercial standpoint, but it's psychologically rewarding for the artist. And another metaphor might just be like sort of chasing that same sort of feeling of having like resolved a painting. And so I have witnessed in some cases where an artist is attempting to sort of like revisit an idea over and over and over again, even unconsciously. But for you, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you push things forward? How do you deal with, I guess you wouldn't call it writer's block, but how do you deal with like creative blocks?
And that's so interesting because whenever I would have a creative block, I would talk to a mentor just casually, and I would ask them like, "Does this happen to you?" And they're like, "Yeah," but then at that point, we just work on something else.
Mm,
So I've heard that a couple times, and that's where you end up kind of grouping your entire practice together. Because whenever you kind of hit that wall, you just still create. It's just probably something adjacent to what you're creating. And so that's where I picked up a lot of the collage works, a lot of the assemblage, um, because I was already working with the material, and I didn't want to just see the material just sit in front of me for so long. But I was stuck at a painting, so that's what would make me okay. Let me create something that is adjacent to what I'm already creating, materials that are from it, and kind of build from there, and it kind of sparks the conversation more. And honestly, sometimes when I work on assemblage for a while, I come back a better painter just coming back into that painting, just because you see how the colors flowed with each other and you have a better relationship with them. So I feel like as long as you're creating, it's always a win. You're always, as an artist, you're winning.
yeah, and I think adjacent to that is that when an artist starts experiencing commercial success in some way, or they're getting visibility, even if they're not selling a lot of work, but they're getting a lot of attention.
Right.
I think that that also can have both a positive and negative effect on the work that they're making. I think, in the standpoint of like commercial success, i.e., selling work, especially if you're working with a gallery, there are different kind of pressures that kind of come into the studio, right? Deadlines is one of them, right? That's like
Right.
one, production deadlines, and then the other is also you could start caring too much about what other people think, and in a weird, in like on an adverse way, right? I think, as you mentioned, getting feedback, I think is always helpful. Even if one chooses to ignore it, sometimes it's just good to hear what
Right.
other people have to say. But it becomes, I think, a little bit dangerous when you're already anticipating what people are going to say about something that you haven't even finished creating. Right? You're like, it's like,
Right.
right. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
I feel like it's happened. It's happened. The good thing is I have thick skin in this creation process, so that's the most beautiful part. Because I've definitely heard some bad criticism about certain things, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna continue it, but I understand what you are saying about that. So I never necessarily listen. So it ends up happening a lot where I create it and I don't feel the best about it, or I create it and I feel the most highly about it, and then you get that reverse response, and that's not what stops the work. I think that that's sometimes unfamiliarity in the work. Somebody would see it and they're just like, hey, I'm not used to seeing your work like this. So I've learned to like kind of angle it in my own brain, like, well, maybe they just haven't seen it in this context, maybe they
Hmm.
haven't seen it on the wall, or they haven't seen it in person. So I feel like that plays a large role in the creation process too. So sometimes we can't just live behind PDF images or just an image of the work.
Right, right. I mean, we're in a time right now where so many artists can go. You can go almost a decade looking at an artist's work digitally, but without ever having encountered it in person. And you have
100%.
this sort of weird idea that you know what it is, but you don't really know what it is. And then I think that's been like the tricky thing, I think, for this generation of artists. And I say generation not just in terms of like age. I'm not just talking about young artists that are like coming up. I just mean any artist that's been working through the past 15 years. I
Right.
think that new collectors are coming into the fold who are being introduced to artists through Instagram or other platforms, and they kind of think they have a better understanding of the work than perhaps they would if they were encountering it in person. And and again, pros and cons, pros and cons.
Of course.
For you, how is as an abstract painter? So two parts to this question. Like number one, were you always making abstraction, right, or has this been part of a evolution and journey? And then part two is how has technology affected the work that you make?
Okay. So for the first question, I did not always make abstract. I first started kind of figuratively, loose figurative, cartoon-like paintings. Um, because I was trying to tell like the rooted story. When I first painted, I just felt the need to kind of paint everything that was from my childhood, all the things that I experienced, and just kind of see it. That was happening for like the first like year and a half, where I was just like really hunkered in to that. Um, and then abstraction came due to the fact that I started seeing the relationship between the colors that I was using. And I just took the black barrier out, which would be the outlining or just to lead you to a figure. I was like, well, let me just take the figure out. So then I can broaden the conversation, actually speak about the topics that I wanted to, because I physically couldn't create the scene as much as I wanted to figuratively with the painting. So I was like, well, abstract, I'm able to at least now you can lean into the visual, use different color palettes, references, stuff like that, that would play a major role in it to change the visual language of it.
And in terms of technology, what's your relationship been like with everything that we've had access to in the past 10 years or so as it relates to your artistic practice? Do you bring
Mm.
that into the studio in any way, or do you try to sort of make a separation between what you're creating on canvas and with your hands? Do you try to make a separation between that and technology?
Technology plays a role in my definitely would bring it into the studio, but not in a sense of like Photoshop. I use just different tools here and there to just collage images. There's like a thing with Instagram layout where they do like an infinite. You can put an image into it infinitely, and you can change the pixels in it. And that helps me a lot with just color palettes whenever I decide color palettes. Because I don't have a genuine relationship with just one specific color. A lot of artists, I see that sometimes where they choose a palette and like that's the palette that they make for the whole series. And I have different relationships amongst the color, and technology does help with that because I'm able to see how colors neighbor each other um, before I even paint it, before I even make the color. So I think that technology, I think that's good. And then whenever you have just mock-up images of your work, that could be a sculpture that you're working on, an image of your work on a wall when you don't have a wall at the very second all your paintings are drying. So it's like, hey, I want to see this and I want to see if I should continue this or not. And you just end up helping out the practice. So yeah, technology does play a major role in it.
And in terms of getting your work out there, are you working independently? Are you working with a gallery? Any art dealers? Like, what's that like for you in your career at this time?
So before school, I've been really just working with, I have some dealers, nothing serious, but dealers that are the ones that are representing my work and helping me get through this pre-stage before I go into school. And then just dealing with that, which has been good. No gallerist at the moment. Just being able to not necessarily tread my feet, but more see what I want out of school and have a better idea about school beforehand and while I'm there, because the MFA program at the Royal College of Art is a year. So for the next year and a half, just being able to just get more acquainted with the work. So then that whenever that time does come for galleries and stuff like that, for more shows, you have a better grasp of just everything that you're creating. And having that just a better love for it. That's all I could say, honestly.
Yeah, a lot of artists, and certainly young artists of color in the past 5, 6 years, let's call it, really have had a lot of new opportunities that could have opened up to them, particularly between 2020 and like 2023, four with the pandemic and a lot of stuff that was happening online and a lot of people reaching out to artists and buying work sight unseen or rather only seen through the lens of Instagram.
Right.
Um, and I think that there was certainly a wave or a moment where I sort of looked and saw a lot of artists kind of jumping into representation and jumping into, when I say that, I mean being represented by galleries if the opportunity was there, and really having a strong sort of commercial push behind their work. I mean, who am I to say prematurely? I mean, I think to some extent that's a subjective thing. I mean, but I do believe that I saw some artists kind of get swept up into the moment,
Of course.
and that can sometimes, sort of take your eye off of further growth and development because now you're sort of responding to the commercial demands or what have you. But as I mentioned in my intro, your work is in the exhibition at the Gantt Center, which means that it is in the collection of Elliot Perry and Kimberly. So um, I'm sure there are other collectors out there that also have your work. How have you balanced that? Like what like having that commercial side, but also staying creative and staying independently minded. Like, how have you balanced that? And the answer to this question really is also for other artists that are listening to this or may listen to this in the future who are trying to also deal with that.
I would definitely say it's been a amazing journey to be able to get into good collections and have the work be seen by really, really good people that are willing to have discourse about your work. I think that that's the best feeling as an artist. Just getting into the commercial side is just having people that are willing to speak to you about your work. Because and I bet painters can all attest to this, is that they've created and people try to pin you as a service, and you're not a service. You're
Hmm.
more like you would want to talk about your work. Sometimes when they say, "Hey, can you just paint my dog?" People don't realize is that like they don't view their art. Not all artists, but they don't view their art in a way of "I'll paint your dog." It's I'm painting this to have that conversation, that inner dialogue. So when you meet people that actually care about watering the artists and just making sure that the artist is taken care of mentally, especially with their work, that's big. So dealing with that, it's been good. It's been good to not have the pressure of a gallery, but then also to have that inner pressure because your work is in a specific collection. Um, you want to go harder. You want to make better work. You feel like the work that you're creating is good, so you want to continue that. So it's definitely an interesting thing because everybody I showed with are either people I've seen going. I'll be at the Guggenheim or I'll be at the Met, and I see them in these shows. Um, so now being the artist that is able to be something like a part of this show, I'm like, okay, well, I have to continue this. That's why school was a big, big thing for my future because I just wanted to have the things that my mentors have the things that my predecessors came with. Um, I saw an interview about with Sam Gilliam, and he talked about how school was very, very important. And I was like, well, my mom would agree with that. So I was like, I might as well go to school, really, really take that time to just fall in love with the work even more. I think that that's been a big thing, is that since I don't have that gallery relationship yet, I haven't been hearing the words burnout or losing the love for it or anything like that. That's when collectors talk to me, they're like, we can tell you love it, and that's amazing. They're like, please keep this fire the whole time, because that means that you'll always would be welcoming to come to work and continue your practice and not just hit that learning curve. So it's been good.
Great, great. Well, we're at the halfway mark here, and now would be a good time to start looking at some images.
Okay.
You've generously provided us with a handful of images of your work, and I think this would be a great opportunity to talk a little bit more explicitly about the process, how you even, come to decide on scale, color palette choices, etc. So for each of the works we have here, maybe you can just take a moment, give us a little bit of like background on the piece, and I'll ask a couple of follow-up questions.
Okay. This work right here, that is the one that is currently in the show at the Gantt. And this is Two Saints, 14 Pigs, and One Rat. This is an ode to Frank Hampton and Mark Clark, the death that happened December 4th, 1969. It was a assassination that happened at his apartment in Chicago. And me and Elliot were talking about this work before it was even made. And I was just had a phone call conversation with him, and we were just talking about how history is altered over the time. Sometimes we get multiple stories when it happens, and then later on, it's just like this one idea of the story. And he just mentions to me briefly, like, "Hey, do you know that somebody died with Fred Hampton?" And I thought that that was very interesting because I know about the death of Fred Hampton, and I did not know that there was another person that died with him. And so when I was creating this work the whole time, that was what I was trying to get the emotion out of. Just the feeling of a forgotten energy or a soul that was left. And then all the attention being on the second canvas. That's why I made it a diptyque. And that was the attention, the detail that they had to harm uh, the Black Panther leader, Fred Hampton. And so the whole conversation is basically Mark Clark being on the left, Fred Hampton being on the right, and just the angel of death leading to that tirade of bullets that they're going to use, and that's why the 14 pigs is in the title, um, because that was what they would historically call the cops also. So I felt like that was a big thing, and I just wanted to show them in a better light. So that's why they were two saints to me. And so that was the narrative that I was placing with this work.
And this is a rather large scale painting. Is this typical for you? Are you working at this scale sort of usually?
This is something that I'm going to start doing. I've made works around this size, just not in the diptyque form. And so this is the largest work that I've made to date. And I felt like this was awesome to see on the wall at the Gantt. And I felt like this is something that I would want to continue. So around that scale, 70 inches by 70 inches. Um, Even in school, I'll probably end up doing like 90 inches by 90 inches, something like that, to be a tribute to the scale because I love this size.
In your bio, there was a reference to basketball dribble patterns.
Yeah.
Um, is that represented in this work, or perhaps we go to the next image and it's sort
And
of there?
in the images that are coming probably in the second and third, those were dealt with basketball dribbles. The idea of the basketball dribbles started coming about because obviously the reference to David Hammons, but I always wanted to get back to my roots of basketball, and I always felt like using the basketball was always going to be something very pivotal. I didn't know if I was physically going to use it, which would be the material of the basketball, or
Sure.
actually mark make. And I started using it to mark make because it felt natural to not being able to use a brush. Sometimes I paint and I don't want to use a brush, and I think that's just building the better relationship amongst just working. And so
Um,
this redlining, you can go
yeah.
next. I'm
So
sorry.
no, no problem, no problem. Sorry for interrupting you. Yeah, I'm always curious about how artists, come to title their work, and are they, interested in the title being poetic or being literal or being sort of like an entry point into the work about that? Because I know every artist has their own sort of their own perspective on that.
Of course, of course. Um, Titling is probably the most important thing to me, besides the painting. But definitely, titling plays a major role. It to me it directs the idea that you're trying to show the viewer. And so I try to always use piercing titles to just have you allude to the message, the overall message that I'm showing.
And in terms of that, do you desire the viewer to understand like what you were thinking when you're making the work, or are you just leaving that completely open for interpretation? Because I know that for some artists, it's important that there is a sort of a framework around the piece or their process that they really want to come across, and for others, it's completely open. Like I created the thing, and you can kind of take from it whatever you want.
A lot of it is up to interpretation. Definitely, I leave that for the viewer. I'm very interested to see what people think about my work when they see it. That's why a lot of my materials that I use are lived in. The concept of just something that's lived a longer life than actually what you're viewing in front of you. So it makes you just question origin, makes you just question if it's a relic or not, and it plays a major role to me in my practice. So that's why I'm very big on my titles, and I'm big on just the material usage and how the paint layers.
I think a lot of people encounter abstraction, particularly if it's for the first time, or they don't consider themselves to be very educated on art. And most people aren't. Why would they be? We live in a world of different careers and interests, and art is a very specific one. And once you
Right.
leave the quote unquote art world and you start talking to people who don't think about it or live in it, so many of our ideas just completely like seem so esoteric. It's sort of like, what are you talking about?
Right,
Kind of thing
right.
I get from people. So how do you manage explaining your work to people who don't know anything about the art world? And again, maybe it's not even a relevant question for you, but it's something I think about often when I'm trying to explain to people the work that I do curatorially, and I realize, okay, I can kind of like really make this complicated, or I can make it really simple in how I try to explain it.
Right.
But for you, what's that been like for you?
It's sometimes you get a lot of people that understand it from what you're trying to show them. Obviously, they can't understand like what made you visually select that. But then it ends up being hard, especially with works like this, when these are the things that you see on top of planes, overviews, views of floors. Um, this is something that's rooted within the artist more than anything. And so some of my work is something that you would have to interpret for yourself. So if you've experienced these things or if you've seen these things, they will jump to you then, and they will have some sort of feeling or reference to you. But other than that, sometimes, yeah, it will probably leave the viewer very, very confused.
Yeah, something you mentioned earlier. We can go to the next image. Something you mentioned
Okay.
earlier that I keep coming back to in my mind is when you made the reference with someone like asking you like you could paint their dog or something like that. Like, which is a funny thing because and whether that was something that actually happened to you or it's just like a general thing, sort of like concept of someone asking what is on the surface kind of like an absurd question.
Right.
Um, I think that it has to do with a combination of things. I think sometimes people want to be supportive of what they consider to be like a young artist or an artist on the rise, and they want to, sort of contribute to your career, but they don't really necessarily know, like how an artist actually like lives or creates, or like, like what your goals are. And so from their perspective, commissioning a portrait of their newborn might just seem like something you could just request when an artist paid them some money.
Right.
They got a gig, you get a painting, everybody's happy, but they don't necessarily realize how crazy it might be to ask a certain artist to do something like that, right? But I do think that some of it comes down to education, right? Like if someone wants to be supportive of the arts, um, there's a process they probably have to go through to better understand like what an artist actually does and is. I mean, an artist, aspiring for museum shows, to be in major collections and things like that. And so have you ever had to sort of like take a collector by the hand and sort of guide them through a better understanding of what it means to be a collector, a supporter, or patron?
It's happened. It's happened. Especially like early in my career, they would just ask like, "Hey, could you one day come and paint like a family portrait of ours?" And I'm just like, "Wow." And it's not like they're there to disrespect you. They're more there to let you know that you're going on a different path.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you're wanting people to support your ideas, support the work that you're willing to put out there. Um, and so then when you meet the collectors that are the opposite of that, you start to just kind of gravitate towards them. So whenever someone's like, "Hey, I would love like if you could do a commission," you're just very, very weary. And obviously you could read the person and realize like how they feel about your work to where you won't get offered to paint a dog. And that's okay. Like I don't think anybody needs to have a dog painting of mine. Um I need to create what I have to create, and as an artist I feel like there's somebody for that job for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, please share something that you like about the work we have on screen now, Man at the Garden.
Okay. So, Man at the Garden, I created this whenever I was going really, really early into my gestural phase. Man at the Garden just played a big role to me because it felt like just somebody taking all the responsibilities of their people, all the colors, and all the colors playing such a role and weighing down that specific man that's centered. And so I felt like that was kind of like a self portrait, nonetheless, just like for any man, just taking a lot of the weighted expectations and just how life is played out. You take almost a lot of other people's problems too, just being alive. So I think that when I was creating Man at the Garden, that was like a big thing. It was just probably was frustrated at some point, so a lot of the reds show up. I think it's a beautiful thing. That's why abstract painting is like my favorite, just because of how you create. If you create intuitively, it ends up coming out of the work. So that's my biggest thing.
Hmm. Hmm. I want to make sure we're able to get through all six images, and this is the third. Let's advance to the next image because I
Yes.
have a few more important questions I'd love to ask you. So
Okay.
this is a bit different from what we've seen. Am I correct that this
Yeah.
is more of an assemblage than a painting on canvas?
Yes. Yes. This is more of collage. Now these were made with basketball dribble marks, and then they are assembled correctly with each other to also have all the colors and all of the neighboring palettes to be in the same color line. So I'm almost creating these to say that all colors are the same because we all have traces of each other within them. And so that's why you would see the yellows and you see the greens and the blues in the greens, because you're almost trying to just say that our neighbor would like us way more if we realized that we were all kind of cut from the same cloth. We were all one being from the beginning. So that was why I made that. And when I was in Colombia, this is a big thing that I was doing in my practice was a lot of the collage works, because I was using a lot of material to imprint on my works, um, to get those just different mark makings. And I didn't want to throw away the paper. And being in another country, you start to realize that being wasteful is it's no reason for it. So I started using these in the works. And it felt really, really invigorating to reuse the work that you were already making paintings with. And so I started assembling them and making large scale, just paperboard works.
When you were in Colombia, were there any new approaches to art making that you either learned while you were there, or you witnessed that sort of found its way into your work?
Um, I definitely, I definitely did. I definitely did. There was a lot of things that I needed to add within the work, and I felt like I wanted to be more within just the creating process. So sometimes the marks, I couldn't understand why the marks were showing up, and that's frustrating as an artist. So you would want your mark making to almost be able to be scheduled. And that's what these were. These were used to almost be able to schedule the mark making. So then I knew which marks were almost like prints, and then eventually start to blend the prints, the printmaking on the work, collage, everything, and start to assemble that all together. So in Colombia, it started showing me that that's where I was leaning towards, more of just like a David Hammons-esque, Rashid Johnson multimedia creation that come from a lot of the root of your works.
Fantastic. Let's go to the next image. And the thing I wanted to ask you, we talked about it a little bit, the basketball dribble patterns. Like, what brought you to that? What was the moment that occurred to you that that could be a way to make art?
I saw David Hammonds use the basketball mark making, but I didn't see it with paint. And I saw it with, like, he was using like the dust and graphite that was getting these marks, these really, really scheduled marks. And it just dawned on me one day. I was just like, well, I'm painting and I want to use these marks because these marks also give a lot of energy and movement. And how am I going to be
Right.
able to use this? And so I started using the ball in the paint and then painting with the basketball itself. And not just using it to dribble, using it also to imprint. And that was another thing that was added into it, using the grooves, using specific basketballs that you would know would layer the paint in a specific way. So the basketball dribble mark making was more of a finding after just seeing David Hammonds use it, but not use it in the manner that you wanted to use it. You wanted to use it almost as a printer. And that, so that was what changed a lot in my practice while I was over in Colombia.
That's great. So let's talk about this work, White Lies for Freedom.
White Lives for Freedom, this was also used with dribble mark making. And White Lives for Freedom is just something that historically we've been told. Um, I feel like every, let's say 5 to 10 years, every 5 to 10 years, there's something about the, yes, every 5 to 10 years, you will see that there's another deal given to the Black community for us to kind of believe in. And I feel like as a society, we kind of just move away from that. And so White Lives for Freedom was more just showing you the carnage of the white lie, just the conversation behind that, just how sometimes we're told things like, hey, we're going to get reparations, we're going to get whatever. And it never ends up happening. It's more just the alluding to us getting something from it. And it's more or less us being free in our own thought, because the white lies are always going to just consume us most of the time. And so creating, that's why a lot of the titles, they're almost to tell my future self what to do, or just to tell somebody that's a viewer to what to do. It's just us being very, very eye opened to history and also our future and how they play a major role into each other.
Yeah, that makes me think of so many different things. I just want to also like think about the amount of time we have left. The art world obviously has a particular kind of structure to it, and depending upon what like levels or tier of art world we're talking about, it becomes less and less diverse, right? And I think that for artists of color, as they're navigating their way through the infrastructure of the art world, it becomes increasingly important to be grounded in what's important to you, because I think so much about the art world can pull you in directions that might be the opposite of what you thought your values were. Um, and it's tricky, right? Because if you're making work about history, and in some cases about injustice, in some cases about sort of ethnically or racially specific concepts and ideas, and you're putting that into an artwork, um, you don't necessarily have any control over where that artwork ends up, right? So it could end up in anyone's home after it's bought, traded, sold, or in any kind of institution. And I often wonder about that, just in terms of like context and how that affects a work. For example, I remember visiting a couple of collectors' homes in the past decade where they, they had artwork in their collection, that for me as a Black American, um, like I wouldn't necessarily want to be reminded of that image every single day. Like, like it's just like, but it's kind of curious that it doesn't say the same thing to them. It doesn't resonate the same thing that it resonates with me. And then I often wonder in this particular case, because it was basically just kind of like be more specific. I believe it was like one instance, it was an image of a Black man being in some way violently like hurt, right? And now here I am as a Black American in this white person's home, looking at an image of a Black man being hurt on their wall in a painting, and it's like this is a very very peculiar situation right here, right?
Right,
Um,
right,
for a lot of meta reasons, right?
right.
And so I'm just kind of curious as it relates to your titling and the concepts behind your work. Um, is that something you ever think about? Like, obviously, institutions in the art world, many of which the larger ones are not, run by people of color, funded by people of color. It's a whole history there that we do not have time to unpack. But I'm just kind of curious as it relates to you and your work. Is that something you ever think about?
Definitely. I would percent. I'm tidally almost in the sense of one day, if the world were to end, someone were to see this and say, "Hey, the conversation was being had the whole time." And so I think that that's the biggest thing as an artist is I see, especially with a lot of black abstraction during the times that they weren't supposed to be making black abstraction, they still spoke about the conversation. And I salute them for that because in that era, you weren't supposed to create that type of work. You did, and you were still able to be very, very representational in the issues that we were facing as Black Americans. And so that was something that I wanted to carry in my work to where that conversation was being had. So then that the dialogue would never be lost. So if I ever passed away and someone had an artist talk with me, they would never assume that they can just like exit a part of the work and just kind of brush over the title or brush over the meaning of the work. So I think that that's important and something that I keep in the back of my mind the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, the work is evidence, right? It's evidence of your existence, it's evidence of your ideas. I think over time, so much about the art world as we believe we understand it will be reviewed and revised and recontextualized in ways that we could never even imagine, because so much has happened in such a compressed period of time. We're down to the final few minutes, so I have no time for a history lesson here. But it's sort of but it's sort of like I think about everything that has happened in the past. Let's call it just 50 years, right?
Right.
Um, Almost everything that we think about in contemporary life, as I mentioned earlier, technology, the commercial side of the art world, contemporary art world as we know it, all the infrastructure around art fairs and all of these things and galleries, even though there were galleries, prior to 50 years ago, for sure. But everything that we kind of think about in this art world could kind of be compressed into like a 50-year period. And I just believe that in a few hundred years, this 50-year period will be seen completely differently than how we think about it. It's going to seem, in my opinion, completely absurd. But that's probably a conversation for another time. I'd like to give you a moment to talk about the work that's on screen, and then I have a couple more questions I'd love to ask you.
Okay. This work untitled, this is something that I'm taking, this process that I've been really, really working hard on. Just working on the work for months and not really finishing it, taking things off of it, more of a lot of erasure, just creating land almost while I'm creating, like while I'm making these works, I'm viewing them as land. Some pieces get pulled off, and that's why you see it being uneven. Just being able to live in the work. I think that that's the biggest thing that I've been creating, and works like this will be something that I will be showing in the future. But added layers to that, and so that's what I'm going to go into with school, is just being able to create this on a larger scale, so many different textures, and being able to have that narrative be placed unevenly, and that's where the shape canvas comes in.
Thank you. I have one final question for you. So let's go back in time, 10, 15 years ago. Let's say 15 years ago. How's your life as an artist today different from what you thought it would be?
Okay, so 15 years ago, I was 15. I was a high school basketball player. And so if someone were to tell me, hey, you're a painter now and you're in museums, I would think that I would be very confused on how did I become a, if I'm currently basketball right now and I didn't finish out this career path. So I would be like, wait, how did I end up becoming a painter if I'm supposed to be doing this? But I would definitely be very, very optimistic. And I think that it's a beautiful journey. It's just being a painter. You're almost, it's the rawest, in my eyes, it's the rawest profession that you can have, because you're almost working on something that is eventually going to be your whole life study. And it's just everything that you kind of devoted your time to. And so, yeah, I would think 15 years ago, I would be mind blown, because I'm like, wow, that's how I work now. That's amazing.
That's great. That's a wonderful answer. Look, Trevor, I really enjoyed our conversation today. It was so insightful. You were so generous with your answers and your time. I encourage everyone to run to the Gantt Center to see your work in person, and of course, all of the other artists that are in the current exhibition there. I'm looking forward to following you, seeing how your career develops, especially after you go through your MFA program. Congratulations and good luck with that.
Thank you.
Um, and yeah, and wishing you the best. So with that, I'm going to bid you goodbye and share my final words. But again, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Dexter. It was great talking to you.
All right, take care. So thank you everyone for being here today. The Gantt's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt Center to expand its reach and develop programs like today's Open Air. You can lend your support to the Gantt Center by visiting ganttcenter.org/donate. You can also be sure to like and subscribe to this channel for future updates on programs that are going to follow. Also, we want you to join us next month. Our next open air will take place on June 2nd. We'll be announcing all the details of that very soon. Thank you for joining us for another great conversation. Look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great evening.